Thank you, and we welcome everybody to Scams and Financial Protection for Older Adults. I'm Karen Jones, President and CEO of the National Caucus and Center on Black Aging, NCBA, and we're so happy that you have joined us today for this very important webinar. I have the pleasure of introducing, first let me let you know this disclaimer. You can move to that next slide. That this is being recorded, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us, and we will be able to tell you, but there is our disclaimer. I have the pleasure of introducing the Assistant Director of the Office of Older Americans at the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which we all call the Bureau, Ms. Deborah M. Royster. Ms. Royster leads a team of talented, mission-driven professionals that advance the mission of the Office of Older Americans, which is to help and protect older consumers across the nation from financial harm and to help older consumers make sound financial decisions as they grow older. Prior to joining the Office of Older Americans, Ms. Royster was the Chief Executive Officer of Seabury Resources for Aging, where Seabury is a nonprofit mission to provide comprehensive social support services, including affordable housing, transportation, case management, and nutrition services to more than 15,000 older adults and family caregivers in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan region. Ms. Royster is an attorney, and her professional career includes serving in legal and executive management positions in the private, nonprofit, and government sectors, which have all focused on health and aging services, telecommunications, and public utilities. Immediately prior to joining Seabury Resources for Aging, she served as General Counsel to the District of Columbia's Department of Aging and Community Living. In that role, she served as chair of the agency's Elder Abuse Prevention Committee, and she also led the agency's effort in implementing strategies and community service programming focusing on elder abuse prevention and awareness, including financial exploitation. Ms. Royster's professional career also includes an extensive record of civic involvement as a board member of nonprofit organizations, which include and certainly serve older adults, the American Society on Aging, Leading Age, the Montgomery County Commission on Aging, Forest Hill, DC, Center for Nonprofit Advancement, and St. Anne's Center for Children, Youth, and Families. I have had the pleasure of serving on a couple of these boards with Ms. Royster and know firsthand of her leadership and her commitment to older adults. Thank you so much, Ms. Royster, Deborah, for joining us today. We appreciate all that you continue to do for our older Americans.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Karen. And thank you for your stellar leadership in aging services. It has certainly been a pleasure to work with you and to learn from you as you shared your wisdom and your expertise with all of us to help serve older adults. And we appreciate all of your efforts and the wonderful organization that you lead that provides such valuable support services, housing, important support services, affordable housing services to and others to older adults and their family caregivers. Also, we want to take this opportunity to thank Angie Body and Angela Tells for their efforts to make today's presentation possible. We very much appreciate all the support that you've provided. I am very, very grateful to be here with you today, and we thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about scams and financial protections for older adults. And before I get started, as Karen referenced the disclaimer there, this is a presentation being made by a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau representative on behalf of the Bureau. It does not constitute a legal interpretation or guidance or advice of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and any opinions that are stated by the presenters are the presenter's own and may not represent the Bureau's views. So let's talk a little bit about scams and frauds. Reports of scams and fraudulent practices have increased significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in 2020, just to give you a little data, the Federal Trade Commission received over 4.7 million reports of fraud, identity theft, and other scams. And this was a very significant increase from the prior year. And older adults were targeted by romance scammers, by imposters, identity thieves, and other fraudsters. Scams affect every community. A 2017 FTC survey revealed that 19.2% of African Americans and 17.3% of Hispanic consumers were victims of fraud. This compares to 14.9% of non-Hispanic white consumers. So given the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on communities of color, we expect to see further upticks in frauds and scams. And we also know that during the pandemic, many people have been confined to their homes and isolated. Many people are also caring for aging parents. Today, more than 1 in 5 Americans are caregivers, and the growth in caring for adult relatives is up markedly among African American caregivers. That's 88% compared to 77% in 2015, and also among Hispanic caregivers. It's 92% versus 85% in 2015. And over the last 5 years, there's also been a shift in where the caregiving takes place. Most caregivers are now reporting that they live with the recipient of caregiving services instead of living in their own home. So the recipient lives with the caregiver instead of living in their own home. And these caregivers, many of them who are family members, can play a very critical role in scam prevention. So in this webinar, we want to let you know about some of the resources that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has that can help you and your loved ones to identify and prevent being victimized by frauds and scams. So let's move to the next slide, please. I'd like to tell you a little bit before we begin about the Office for Older Americans. If you're not familiar with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we are a US government agency that was created about 10 years ago in the middle of the last housing crisis. And we work to make sure that banks and lenders treat everyone fairly. In the Office for Older Americans, we conduct research and we look at policy and educational initiatives to help protect older consumers from financial harm. And we also create tools and resources that help older consumers make sound financial decisions as they age. We'll talk more about this as we get more into this webinar, but we have a robust array of resources that you can use. They are available online. You can download them or you can order them in bulk, and they are all for free. You can see our resources at our website at consumerfinance.gov/olderamericans. Next slide, please. So this slide really shows some interesting data that we took from the FTC's Consumer Sentinel. And this data is a little different from what you might expect. Contrary to what many people think, younger adults are actually more likely to report losing money in scams than older adults. However, as you can see on the right-hand side of that slide, when older adults do lose money, they report much higher dollar losses than younger people. You'll see a a median loss of $1,300 for people over age 80 compared to only $324 for people who are in their 20s. So you can see from this data why it is so critically important for us to focus on the issue of scams that affect older adults. Next slide, please. So who's at risk for financial exploitation? It's a very simple answer. Anyone can be the victim of financial exploitation. Financial exploitation crosses all social, educational, and economic boundaries. And one way that people can help prevent scams against older adults is by talking with the older adults in our lives, including the older adults who we care for. The data shows very clearly that the more older adults know about specific types of scams, the more likely we are to be able to identify those scams and not be victimized by them. Next slide, please. So I want to talk to you a little bit about why I do this work. Caregiving is a topic that really resonates with me, both professionally and personally. Professionally, before coming to the Bureau, I did work in this space at the DC Department of Aging and Community Living, and also at Seabury. And in those roles, I really saw firsthand the challenges that many people face as they grow older and with caregiving issues. And personally, I was a caregiver for my mother until her death approximately 1 year ago at 101 years of age. And this is my mother, Iris Elizabeth Roberts Royster. On the left-hand side, that is a picture of her when she was about 18 or 19 years old. And on the right-hand side, that is a picture of her later in her life after many, many, many amazing accomplishments and just so much love given to so many. This picture was taken, I believe, when she was in her early 90s. Next slide, please. So this is a family picture at a family holiday dinner, and you'll see there on the left was my dad. My mom was on the right. Looks like I think she was serving up the meal, and that was me in the middle doing what I spent most of my time doing at that point, which was staying close to my parents and sucking my thumb. So that's one of my favorite pictures of me with my parents. My beloved father passed in 1981 from lung cancer, and my mother served as his caregiver during his illness. They were married for nearly 40 years. And with my father's death, my mother was left as a widow at the age of 60. And she embarked upon a new life where she provided childcare to working families. And she was a deeply religious woman. She later remarried a wonderful man. And she also graduated from college at the age of 81, making her the most senior graduate ever at Columbia Union College in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Next slide, please. And this is a picture of my mother at her college graduation, which was an absolutely joyous day where she just inspired so many, including all of us, her children, her grandchildren, and those who know and love her. Following college graduation, my mom worked as a substitute teacher in Montgomery County, Maryland, until she was nearly 90 years old. And she gained a whole new generation of young fans there as well. But in her early 90s, my mother's needs began to change. She developed dementia, and she needed more support to be able to live independently and to continue to enjoy her remarkable life. And it was my honor and my privilege to serve as her caregiver, including as her financial caregiver. Next slide, please. As we continued on our journey together, my mother and I discovered a whole network of skilled, compassionate professionals at the CFPB and other federal, state, and local government agencies, and also social services professionals and organizations like the NCBA, who helped my mother get the support and resources that she needed to continue to be able to live with as much independence as possible, and with dignity and with respect and joy. And with this critical support from this amazing network of professionals, my brothers and I were able to help our mother live her life as she wanted to live it until she passed peacefully in her sleep on September 12, 2020. So this is why I work at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and in the Office for Older Americans. And this is why I'm here today, to honor my beloved parents and to help others, older adults and their families, their children, grandchildren, financial caregivers, to get the information and community resources and supports that they need to be able to live comfortably and independently for as long as possible, and to live with dignity, respect, and joy. If we are fortunate, if we are blessed, we will live long lives, and growing older should be a time of joy and nurturing relationships and connections with family and friends, new discoveries and reinvention, and with proper planning, indeed, it can be. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to turn our program over to Lisa Schifferle, who is my colleague at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Before she starts, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about this amazing lady. Lisa is a senior policy analyst in the CFPB's Office for Older Americans, and she leads several of our important initiatives, including our Money Smart for Older Adults initiative and our Managing Someone Else's Money program initiative, and she will talk to you more about that today. Lisa's career in consumer protection spans more than 20 years. She worked as an attorney before joining the Bureau. She worked as an attorney at the Federal Trade Commission, and there she also led trainings on scam prevention, and she served as the FTC's identity theft coordinator. She litigated fraud and data security cases. And before that, Lisa worked at the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau, where she represented low-income clients in consumer, bankruptcy, housing, public benefits, and employment cases. Lisa is an attorney. She received her bachelor's summa cum laude from Yale College and her law degree from the University of Virginia. She is a tireless advocate on behalf of older adults. And it is my pleasure now to turn the program over to Lisa.
Thanks so much, Deborah. And thanks again to NCBA for inviting us here today to talk about scams and financial protection of older adults. Deborah really set the stage nicely, both with her personal story about why so many of us are doing this work to help loved ones who are older, and also with the data on older adults and scams. And as Deborah said, we know that people who can recognize scams are much less likely to lose money to them. So today what we're going to do is talk about how to recognize and avoid some scams. We're going to start with cyber scams, then go over COVID scams and identity theft. And then I'll close by sharing some resources that we hope will help you and others in your community. So let's start with cyber scams. And during the COVID pandemic, we've all been doing a lot more online than ever before. So it's really a good time to think about cyber basics, things like using strong passwords and keeping your antivirus software up to date. And it's also particularly important to know and recognize cyber scams. So on the next slide, you'll see 4 very common cyber scams that I'm going to talk about today. There are the online dating scams, which is the scam with the highest dollar loss for older adults. I'll talk more about them in a minute, but people lose tens of thousands of dollars to these scams. Then there are the tech support scams, which are one of the scams that are most reported by older adults. The dollar loss usually is not as high, maybe $300 or $400, still significant, but not tens of thousands of dollars usually. But this is one of the most common scams that older adults do report. And then finally, I'll discuss mortgage closing and investment scams, both of which can be particularly harmful to older adults who might be at risk of losing their homes or retirement savings right when they need them the most. So let's start with online dating scams. These happen when you meet someone online. Next slide, please. It can maybe be through a dating app, or it can be through a regular social media platform. And then they start what seems to be a relationship with you. But the twist is they ask for money, often either for a medical procedure or for travel to visit you. they often want you to wire that money or put it on a prepaid card or gift card, or they ask for access to your bank account. Now, if you don't know anyone who's been involved in a romance scam, you probably understand that these scams are really difficult because they pull on people's heartstrings, making it very hard to convince a friend or family member that it is, in fact, a scam. I want to give you an idea by sharing a story that a scam survivor shared from a Senate hearing recently. She was involved in one of these online dating scams, and here's how it evolved for her, which shows how it really could happen to anyone. She said she was widowed, she was not looking for love, but she got a friend request on Facebook from a gentleman who liked dogs and gardening, just like she did. And then she connected with him and started just having conversations online. Then he connected her with his kids, and that really pulled on her heartstrings since she had never had kids of her own, and they started calling her mom and dad. Eventually, the daughter asked for money for feminine products, saying she was embarrassed to ask her dad. So this woman sent money to the daughter on gift card. And then she started getting other requests for gift cards from the children and from the man himself. Things started getting kind of fishy for her when he was supposed to visit her. And then she got a call saying he was held up in customs because someone had put drugs in his bag. She was told to send $20,000 right away. This is when she kind of decided she couldn't do it anymore. He had showed her his bank account so she could see he had a lot of money, but she had already lost her husband's life insurance money and spent it all basically on these requests for gift cards. And unfortunately, not only did she lose money, but she also lost the life that she thought she was going to have with this man. So her story really shows how these romance scams can evolve. So what are some ways to recognize an online dating scam or romance scam? Well, the big tip off is that the love interest is asking for money for an emergency or for travel, or sometimes both. Also, like I mentioned before, think about how they're asking you to pay. If they ask for wire transfer or prepaid cards or gift cards, that's a red flag because they know once you send it, then you're not going to be able to get your money back. Also, if they ask for access to your bank accounts very quickly. So to protect against online dating scams, some tips you can share with people is don't send money or give access to your accounts to someone you have not met in person, even if it feels like you're developing a relationship with them. Also, to limit what personal financial information you share with a new love, and limit what personal information you share online. Now, on the next slide, you'll see one of our fraud prevention placemats. If you haven't heard of these, you can find them at consumerfinance.gov/placemats. And they were originally designed as fraud prevention messages to go with Meals on Wheels and other meal delivery programs, so that when people got their meal, they got a placemat with a message about a fraud so they could recognize and avoid it. This is the one that we have on romance scams. These placemats have become so popular that we now have made posters, bookmarks, and other materials, and you can order them in bulk online in English and Spanish for free. So we hope you will order them at consumerfinance.gov/order, and you can share them in your community and help try to prevent scams like this. Now, on the next slide, you'll see tech support scams. This is the next cyber scam I want to tell you about. As I mentioned before, it's one of the most prevalent ones. It can happen either by a phone call from someone saying this is tech support. They'll often use a name like Microsoft or Apple to make it sound legit, but it's not really Microsoft or Apple. Or sometimes you get a pop-up on your screen telling you to call tech support, or you get an unsolicited email with a link to click on. But to guard against these tech support scams, here are some tips. First, don't give control of your computer to someone who calls you out of the blue. What they do is they will either call you or give you a number to call, and then they can remote into your computer and they can steal your personal information. Or they may sell you useless software by claiming to show you viruses on your computer that don't actually exist, and then telling you you need to pay for tech support services. So also, don't click on links in unsolicited pop-ups or emails. This is a good way to avoid all sorts of scams, not just a tech support scam, because these links can sometimes download what's called malware, which can basically take information from your computer. And also keep your antivirus and anti-malware software up to date in order to guard against these and other online scams. If you're not sure about how to keep it up to date, one good thing to do is to set it to auto update so that it updates automatically. Now on the next slide, you'll see another one of these fraud prevention placemats we have. This one's called Play It Safe Online. It goes over some of the basic cybersecurity tips, like locking your devices and using strong passwords, at least 12 characters, and limiting what information you share online, and knowing the red flags of scams like we're talking about today. And I'm very excited to report we just learned today that this particular placemat was one of the top publications by the US government, second to the Guide to the Grand Canyon. So it's pretty exciting for a consumer education publication to be that popular. So we do encourage you to check it out. Again, you can get it at consumerfinance.gov/placemat. Placemats with an S, actually. The next cyber scam I want to tell you about is a mortgage closing scam. These can happen when you're buying a new home for older adults that may be downsizing in retirement, or for refinancing your current home, maybe to age in place. And what we know is that scammers are increasingly taking advantage of home buyers during the closing process. And what they do is they try to divert your closing costs and down payment into a fraudulent account. They'll send you something a couple days before closing, or even, a couple hours before closing, saying that there have been last minute changes to your wiring instructions. And they try to make it look like the email is coming from your agent or your settlement attorney. So you may end up accidentally wiring all the money you saved for your home, which for most of us is all the money or most money we're going to spend on anything in our lives. You may end up wiring all that to a scammer. So these are very important to know about. And on the next slide, you'll see some red flags about how to recognize these scams, which are that, if you get these kind of last minute changes to wiring instructions, especially if they ask you for financial information by phone or email, what we suggest people do is to call back your agent or settlement attorney, or better yet, call them both to verify any changes to wiring instructions before sending any money. It's always good to talk to two people about the closing process, like your realtor and your settlement agent, to make sure that you aren't accidentally calling one of them that's a scammer. Double check. I mean, it's a huge, huge investment. So very important one to check on and not worry or feel like, oh, I'm bothering them. The CFPB also has a mortgage closing checklist, which you can use to help you through the process. And what if this does happen to you? If it does happen to you and you think you've wired money to a scammer in this way, contact your bank or the wire transfer company immediately and ask for a wire recall. Really reporting the error as soon as possible can increase the likelihood and ability to recover. You can also file a complaint with the FBI at ic3.gov. The last cyber scam I want to tell you about is just investment scams. On the next slide, this slide is good, thanks. You'll see that scammers may take advantage of your trust or inexperience, but they also take advantage of very savvy investors. And they might ask you to put all your money into what they say is a no-risk investment, or take your money and say, don't worry, I'll take care of it. This is a really great deal. We've heard a lot about a lot of this happening to very savvy older adults, sometimes people who own their own business, so they're used to investing, so maybe more prone to these kind of investment opportunity scams. It can even be someone from your neighborhood, your community, or your faith group, so you naturally trust them more and they take advantage of that. So on the next slide, you'll see some red flags to look out for investment scams, because again, if you can recognize these scams and people can recognize them, you're less likely to lose money to them. Red flags are being pressured to act now. That's a big red flag for all sorts of scams. And if they say it's guaranteed or no risk, leave it all to them. That's another big red flag. Or if they won't explain their payment structure, maybe there's something in it for them then that they're not disclosing. So to avoid these investment scams, the big thing is don't let anyone rush you. You can also check the background of a broker, brokerage firm, or investment advisor at finra.org. That's a great way to check whether an investment or financial advisor is legit or not. Now, next, I want to talk to you a bit about COVID scams. Across all age groups, there's been a big increase in scams during the pandemic. According to the FTC's Consumer Sentinel data, which takes consumer complaints from all sorts of different government agencies, the consumers reported losing more than $3.3 billion to fraud in 2020. That's up from $1.8 billion in 2019. So that's almost doubling during the pandemic. And it makes sense because with social isolation and increased online activity, like we mentioned before, we're all at more risk for scams. So I want to tell you about some of the CFPB's tools and resources that hopefully will help you protect your finances during the pandemic. The first is consumerfinance.gov/coronavirus. This is where the CFPB has put together all of our COVID-related resources. We have these available in English and Spanish, as well as a variety of other languages listed on the slide here. We also have audio files, which can help for lower literacy people who prefer, or lower vision people who prefer to get the information through an audio format. Has information about scams. It also has financial protection information about if you're behind on your mortgage and rent, and we'll go over that more in a few minutes. But let's talk about some of the scams that we're seeing during the pandemic. One category of scams are the coronavirus healthcare scams, and these have a COVID twist. Next slide, please. At first, it was a lot of vaccine offers saying you can get early access to the vaccine for free. Now there are test kit offers, phony test kit offers saying that maybe Medicare will cover the test kit. There also are scam offers related to air filter systems that say they'll remove COVID-19 from the air in your home, which can't really happen scientifically. And then there are contact tracing scams. If you look on the right, you'll see a nice infographic from the FTC that talks about contact tracing scams. And what's happening here is scammers are pretending to be contact tracers in order to get your personal information. So they say you've been exposed to someone who tested positive for COVID, and then they ask for personal information or money. So keep in mind that real contact tracers will not ask for money. They will not ask for your social security number. They will not ask for your bank or credit card numbers, and they also will not ask for your immigration status. So those are some good ways to spot and avoid those contact tracing scams. On the next slide, you'll see government imposter scams. These are a big issue all times, but they take on a new twist during the pandemic. For example, like I mentioned, people may get calls from Social Security or Medicare saying they're offering special access to coronavirus tests or treatments. So those are scams. There also were for a while scams related to the economic impact payments or stimulus money. Right now, one of the most prevalent scams in terms of government imposters are these FEMA scams. If you haven't heard, FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is legitimately offering up to $9,000 in funeral expenses for COVID-related funeral expenses. But unfortunately, scammers are stooping to really an all new low by preying on this and calling, pretending to be from FEMA, and then getting your personal information and your loved one's personal information right when you're dealing with a death in the family. So that's one to be aware of. And there are tips on this slide for how to avoid a variety of government imposters. And it's good to know that the government's not calling you about expediting your economic impact payment. That's not happening. Don't visit government websites like by clicking on links. You should go to the websites directly. Again, those links can install malware. And most of all, say no to anyone who claims to be from a government agency asking for cash, gift cards, wire transfer, cryptocurrency, or personal or financial information. The government does not take payment those ways. So if you get a call from someone claiming to be from the government asking for payment those ways, it's a scam. On the next slide, I want to talk briefly about errand helper scams. This is a scam that was, particularly prevalent when people were completely quarantined and older people and other people confined to their homes might need people to help with their errands, and they would pay someone and that person would run off with their money. Hopefully this won't rise too much again, but with winter approaching and with the Delta variant, it's good to keep an eye out for these errand helper scams. And if you know someone who needs help running errands, a good source for reliable care is the Elder Care Locator at eldercare.acl.gov or 1-800-677-1116. They can help you connect to resources in your local community that can help with getting errands and a whole variety of other needs. On the next slide, you'll see coronavirus-related charity scams. This is just when people create a fake charity and they may say that it's going to, benefit a whole variety of different people. Some of them may be COVID-related charities. The big thing to know about any kind of charity scam is, again, don't pay by cash, gift card, or money transfer. And again, visit the organization's website directly rather than clicking on a link. I always say be wary of any charities calling you for donations. A legitimate charity will be willing to give you something in writing before you give to them. So if you get a call, you can just say, I don't give money over the phone, send me something in writing. And then if you don't get anything, it may have been a scam. If you do, you can check it out further. The Better Business Bureau has a Wise Giving Alliance at give.org that you can check out charities to make sure they are legit before giving to them. Another scam that we're seeing during the pandemic and particularly concerned about are mortgage relief scams. And I'll tell you in a minute about some resources for people who are behind on their mortgage or rent, because we know a lot of people are behind and you are not alone if you're in that situation. But first, let me tell you about some tips to avoid mortgage relief scams, because there are scammers trying to prey on this and saying that they'll help you stop foreclosure. The big thing to know here is never pay upfront to someone who says they can stop foreclosure. That's illegal for them to charge you an upfront fee. And if the government is guaranteeing if the company is guaranteeing it's going to get the terms of your mortgage changed, guaranteeing you won't lose your home, those are big red flags too, especially if they say, pay me, don't pay your mortgage company. That's another red flag. I saw that a lot when I was a legal services attorney during the housing crisis, the past housing crisis. So we don't want that to happen to people again. So the bottom line for all of these COVID-related scams and other scams, next slide, please, is to say no if anyone asks, if anyone calls you asking for personal information like your social security number, bank account. Because remember that scammers can spoof caller ID, so you do not know who's really calling you when they call. Even if it says Social Security or the IRS, we know that scammers have been spoofing those phone numbers, so you cannot trust that. Even if it sounds like your grandchild, it may not be. Scammers are also pretending to be grandchildren to try to get your money. So don't trust caller ID. If anyone contacts you asking for money, especially by gift card or wire transfer, then hang up, call back at a number you know to be correct before giving any money. So now let's turn to some of the pandemic financial protection and housing instability, because another good way to avoid scams is to have resources so that you are not as vulnerable to these scams. So we know that housing insecurity remains a particularly critical challenge during the pandemic. Next slide, please. As of May 2021, there were 6.7 million renter households that were behind in their rent. And right now there are over 8 million homes at risk of eviction or foreclosure. And unfortunately, statistics show that Black and Hispanic families are particularly hard hit, being more than twice as likely to report being behind on housing payments than white families. So it's really important to get these resources out to people who can use them. On the next slide, you'll see some additional statistics about the differential impact by race and ethnicity. The Census Pulse survey data based on the US Census tells us that lower income renters are more likely to be behind on rent, not surprising if you have less money. And also that Black and Hispanic renters are more likely to report that they will likely be evicted. For example, 22% of Black renters are behind on rent compared with 17% of Hispanic and 11% of white renters. And for homeowners, you'll see in the middle part there, 11% of Black homeowners are behind on mortgage payments compared with 8% of Hispanic and 3% of white homeowners. So it's particularly important to make sure that Black and Hispanic households know about the housing protections and rental assistance available to them. So that's why we're really grateful for this opportunity to be here and to share the CFPB's resources. On the next slide, you'll see consumerfinance.gov/housing. I already told you about consumerfinance.gov/coronavirus, which has a lot of our COVID-related tips, but this one gets you right to the housing information. If you know someone who is behind on their mortgage or rent, this is the place to go. On the next slide, you'll see some of the protections that are available right now to homeowners if they are behind on the rent. There's something called a forbearance, which basically means that you can arrange with your mortgage servicer to temporarily stop paying your mortgage. You'll have to pay it later, but right now, if you're having trouble due to COVID, then you can ask for a forbearance. There also are foreclosure protections, or maybe you should check with your state or locality to see what foreclosure bans are still in place, if any. Otherwise, the CFPB has recently issued a rule, which means that loan companies have to negotiate with you through what's called loss mitigation, which is just their shop that talks to you about the fact that you're behind on your mortgage and figures out what you can do. They have to talk to you about that before foreclosing. And these protections are in place till the end of the year. So if you know anyone in this situation, this Regulation X protection that I was talking about is just in place through December 31st. So it's good to reach out to the mortgage company as soon as possible. There also is a homeowner assistance fund, which Congress has set aside money to help people with paying mortgage payments, also utility payments. And not many people know about this and how to use it. So I encourage people to go to consumerfinance.gov/housing for more information. Also on the next slide, if you know anyone who's back behind on their rent, the CFPB, along with the other housing related government agencies, has set up a rental assistance finder. Again, you can find this at consumerfinance.gov/housing, or you can get right to it at consumerfinance.gov/rent-help, which you see at the bottom of this slide. What it does is it lets you put in the state that you live and or the tribal territory, and it can also break it down by county. And it will give you, once you put that in, it will spit out for you what are all the resources in your region for rental assistance, and it'll give you right the links to apply. So it makes it easy for people. You know, there's a good amount of this money right now that is sitting there waiting to be used, which as a former legal services attorney, kind of breaks my heart. I hope that the people who need it can get to it. So please do spread the word about this rental assistance finder so people can get the resources they need to stay in their homes. We also have a housing portal. On the next slide, you'll see a copy of some of the videos we have on YouTube. I know I've gone through a ton of information on this presentation, so if you want a refresher or more in-depth information, we have videos on things like 5 steps on how to ask for mortgage forbearance due to COVID. We also have one on 3 steps for struggling renters to delay eviction, so I'd encourage you to check those out as well. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is avoiding scams and identity theft. So identity theft can be a big problem for people, as can scams. And we've talked a lot about how we each can recognize scams for ourselves. But on the next slide, you'll see how can we recognize if a loved one is being financially exploited. Here are some warning signs. Of course, if the money or property is missing, they've probably already been exploited. Also look for things like sudden changes in spendings and savings. Are they suddenly withdrawing large sums of money for the ATM that they weren't doing before? Maybe they're sending it to a scammer. Are they suddenly afraid or seem afraid of a relative, caregiver, or friend? Maybe that person is putting undue influence over their finances, especially if you notice that that person keeps the loved one isolated and doesn't let them speak for themselves. Those are red flags as well. Now, what about identity theft? On the next slide, you'll see some ways to safeguard yourself from identity theft. There's no foolproof way to prevent identity theft because it can and does happen to tons of people no matter what you do. But here are some things to try to reduce the likelihood of identity theft, to protect your personal information, especially your social security number. Don't give out your social security number unless absolutely needed. And don't give out personal information over the phone if someone calls you. Like I said, that can be a scammer. Also, protect your mail, especially tax returns, as tax season is going to be upon us before we know it again. Take those tax returns directly to the post office, not in the outgoing mail, because thieves try to steal tax mail around tax time. Also, review your credit report at least annually at annualcreditreport.com. We'll talk about that more in a minute. On the next slide, you'll see some tips about protecting your credit. Normally, we say review it at least annually. Due to COVID right now, you can get your credit report free weekly, so you could check it every week if you wanted to. And it's particularly good to check your credit report right now if you are working out a forbearance or foreclosure prevention or any other sort of payment plan due to COVID. Make sure that the company has properly reflected that on your credit report, because you should not be treated detrimentally for those. If you're already up to date and you entered into a forbearance, then there shouldn't be any delinquency reflected. So check your credit report and make sure that it accurately reflects the status of things. And if not, you can file a complaint with the CFPB at consumerfinance.gov/complaint. Now, the next few slides show some other tools you can use to try to protect your identity. There's something called a fraud alert, which you may have heard of. Basically, this means that creditors have to verify your identity before they extend new credit. So it lasts for a year and it's totally free. It's very easy to set up. It takes less than 5 minutes. You only need to set it up with a phone call or online with one of the 3 major credit reporting agencies like Experian, Equifax, or TransUnion, and then they have to tell the other 2. If you have already been a victim of identity theft, then you are entitled to an extended fraud alert, which lasts 7 years. There you have to show, present an identity theft report, which you can get through identitytheft.gov. So fraud alert is one mechanism to protect your credit. You may have also heard about a credit freeze or security freeze. On the next slide, you'll see more information about that. This is a stronger protection because it restricts access to your credit, so it's harder for thieves to open credit in your name. With a fraud alert, you'll get an alert if someone's trying to misuse your credit, but the credit freeze will stop them from being able to do it, both related to credit transactions. But the thing to know about this is it restricts access to credit to you too. So if you're about to buy a new home or a new car and you need to take out new credit, then you're going to have to lift the freeze with each of the 3 credit reporting agencies each time you want to take out new credit. So this is free. It can be a good tool, especially for people who are not about to apply for a new loan or other credit, but you should know about that inconvenience factor in terms of if you are about to take out new credit, you might not want to do the credit freeze right at this moment. On the next slide, you'll see credit monitoring. People often ask about, should I do credit monitoring? This just alerts you to changes in your accounts. You may get an email, text message, or phone call, depending on how you set it up. Most credit monitoring companies charge a fee for their service. And the thing to know about it is you may be able to do a lot of this for yourself for free using annualcreditreport.com, especially now that you can get weekly credit reports for free during the pandemic. And you can also get free fraud alerts and credit freezes, which was not the case until about 5 years ago or so when the credit freezes became free. So there's a lot you can do on your own for free. There may be times when it's helpful to get the paid credit monitoring. And if you're in a data breach and they offer free credit monitoring, I would encourage getting that. But to pay for it, think about what you can do on your own for free. Now, before we get to your questions, I just want to close by telling you about some scam prevention resources that we have. On the next slide, you'll see our Money Smart for Older Adults program. It's an awareness program we developed with the FDIC, and it focuses on preventing elder financial exploitation and scams, a lot of the scams we talked about today. If you're someone who goes out in your community and gives presentations, it's really nice because it has an instructor guide for you along with a PowerPoint. And then it has a resource guide that you can hand out to participants. It's all available again in bulk at no charge in English and in Spanish. And there's a link there for where you can find it. And also you can get all of our materials at consumerfinance.gov/order. That's where you can order them for free. On the next slide, you'll see our fraud prevention placemats. I already told you about those, and you saw some examples of those with the Play It Safe online one and the romance scam one. You can get those at consumerfinance.gov/placemats. And on the next slide, you'll see our managing someone else's money guides. These are guides for financial caregivers. There's one if you are a guardian, one if you're a trustee, one if you're power of attorney, and one if you're a government fiduciary. And they help you understand your role as a financial caregiver. We also have a brand new publication called Considering a Financial Caregiver, Know Your Options. This is for someone who's maybe early in the financial caregiving process. Next slide, please. And maybe you're just starting to notice that you or a loved one needs help with managing their finances, or maybe you're planning ahead for your own financial future. This will go over some informal financial caregiving options, formal financial caregiving options like power of attorney, and then gives you a list of questions to help you consider who's the best person to choose as your financial caregiver. So you can find all of these at consumerfinance.gov/MSEM, like managing someone else's money. On the next slide, you'll see a publication we call Planning for Diminished Capacity and Illness. All of these publications are free, so you can order them as many as you want to pass out in your community or just to have for yourself. This is a good one, which we did with the Securities and Exchange Commission for planning ahead to stay in control of your finances in a time where you may have age-related cognitive decline. Now, we did recently update this to include information about trusted contacts and Social Security advanced designation and other new protections. So I'd encourage you all to check it out. And on the next slide, you'll see our Housing Insecurity Digital Toolkit. If there are any people on this call and webinar who are intermediaries who are working in this field, we'd encourage you to check out this toolkit. It allows you to share a lot of the information that I shared about the rental assistance finder and otherwise. You'll see at the bottom right, you can find this at consumerfinance.gov/COVID rent. So who can help? If you do notice that you or someone else you love may have been involved in a scam, especially if it's an older person, on the next slide, you'll see there is a link for Adult Protective Services. That is an option. You also can find contact information at eldercare.acl.gov for Adult Protective Services, and also for a lot of other resources in your area that may help the person. Of course, if it is a situation where the person is in imminent physical bodily harm or a crime has been committed, then do call the police at 911. Otherwise, you can consider calling Adult Protective Services, and you can report scams to the FTC at reportfraud.ftc.gov. Now, on the next slide, we have some of our information at the CFPB. For more help, like I said, a lot of our coronavirus information is at consumerfinance.gov/coronavirus. If you want to file a complaint with us related to, say, a credit card company, a loan company who hasn't treated you fairly, a bank or lender who you believe has not treated you fairly, then you can file that type of complaint at consumerfinance.gov/complaint. And again, I know I've tossed out a whole bunch of different URLs, but you can find all of this information at consumerfinance.gov/older Americans. That will link you to all the other different little URLs that we talked about. So, and I know that Chanel has been posting a lot of these links in the chat. So we hope that you will take all this information and pass it on to others in your community and your families, friends, And if you are working on these issues, then to colleagues and the people that you work with, because the more we talk about scams, the more we share this information, the more we can help people avoid losing money to scams. So with that, we are happy to take your questions.
Lisa, thank you very much. Thank you very much to both you and Deborah for your thoughtful and thought-provoking presentation and remarks. We'd like to invite our audience to ask questions by chat. And as we wait for those questions to come in, I have a few questions that I'd like to ask. And so my first question is, how do we protect ourselves from those payday loan scammers?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, for payday loans, I mean, it's a lot of the same information that we've said for other scams, which is don't let anybody rush you into anything. And also make sure you are looking for legitimate companies. It's always good before you're dealing with any sort of company to look them up and Google them with their name and the word scam or fraud or complaint and see what comes up. Payday lenders in particular can cause a lot of financial havoc for people, especially if there are high interest rates involved or other financial arrangements that seem good in the immediate future, but then end up being harmful in the long term. So it's very important to check out those companies before dealing with any payday lenders. And there's more information about payday lending on our website at consumerfinance.gov.
And then my second question is, as we wait for the questions to come in, is dumpster diving still prevalent, or scammers more focused on technology?
Dumpster diving is still, I wouldn't say prevalent, but it's still an issue to think about. I mean, we all should be shredding our documents rather than just putting them in, in the trash, especially companies. If anybody works for a company, it's very important. There was a case that the FTC brought years ago where CVS Pharmacy had just thrown away people's prescription information, and it literally ended up flying in the streets of New York. With people's personal information. Also, if you think about natural disasters, oftentimes, unfortunately, people's personal information after a hurricane or tornado may be strewn about in the area. So it's important to safeguard personal information that way. That's not really dumpster diving exactly, but it's a similar idea in terms of why shredding is so important when you no longer need documents, and only keeping what you really need, not keeping everything under the sun. Like don't be a pack rat. Keep only what you really need for your finances, because anything extra that you keep could end up being in the wrong hands. But yes, increasingly online safety is also important, which is why it's important to have those strong passwords, which usually means at least 12 letters, numbers, special characters. Longer is stronger is a good motto to remember. Keeping the antivirus and anti-malware up to date are other good tips as well.
And that's a perfect segue into my next question about community shredding. I know we have community shredding in my neighborhood, and I perfectly package all of my personal papers and so forth, and I leave my box there. Should I stay to make sure that my personal effects, my papers, are shredded?
That's a very good question. It's kind of like, do you stay to make sure your suitcase gets on the conveyor belt at the airport? I always like to stay and watch and like, are they really putting it on there? Because I've had my luggage lost before. I mean, that's a matter of, personal preference, and also making sure that the place you're going to for these shredding events is legitimate and, not only well-intentioned, because there may be well-intentioned places that don't have the staffing or resources to do it properly. And then there may be ill-intentioned places that are set up just to take people's personal information. So I'd make sure if you're going to a shredding event that it's with a reputable group. And yeah, it's personal preference whether you want to wait and watch and make sure that it gets shredded or not.
That is a good question, though. It's a very good question. I can recall kind of having that dilemma myself. And a lot depends on if you're working with a trusted provider, an entity, then that makes you feel a little more comfortable. It's still a matter of personal preference, but I think as a starting point, it's really important to be dealing with a reputable company, as Lisa said, and a trusted provider of shredding services. So at least that can give you some assurance.
And we have a question here in the chat, and it reads, my mother was diagnosed with dementia. My older brother began taking care of her finances using a POA. We discovered that he was taking money from her accounts and opened credit cards in her name, using both resources for himself. We filed an identity theft complaint with the police to no avail. She has since passed, and now the credit cards have placed a lien on her home. Is my older brother still responsible?
That is a very good question and very fact specific. I really, I hate to punt, but I think it's best that you consult with an elder law attorney in your location, because so much of this does vary based on state law. And I don't want to tell you something that is incorrect in terms of responsibilities for it. You need to talk to a lawyer in your state to get the most accurate information on that.
But just to add to what Lisa said, it does raise a very important and troubling issue, which is that many times financial exploitation takes place at the hands of people who are trusted. And sometimes those are family members. In many instances, it's easier because our family member may have diminished capacity, other handicaps, disabilities that prevent them from being able to really focus or to be aware of these issues. And then many times other family members are isolated or kept out of the financial picture. So those are very difficult situations. I've seen them, many different variations of that sort of issue historically. One thing I think is helpful if it's wherever possible is to try to make sure there's more than one family member, involved, if you can, in helping to manage a loved one's affairs. I was my mother's financial caregiver, but I will tell you, I made no decision, and I was their power of attorney. I made no decisions without contacting one of my brothers, and even down to writing, a check for utilities or whatever. I let them know, and they had access to her bank accounts as well, to be able to see. They had viewing access to see what I was doing, and I just felt that was really important for there to be complete transparency and for all of us to know. And I think if you have more than one person involved, that can more than one family member or other trusted person, that can be helpful to identify and prevent this type of problem.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat, and it reads, why is Equifax not giving people their credit report online as TransUnion and Experian are doing?
I am not sure about that. It was my impression that all three credit reporting agencies were doing it. You could go to annualcreditreport.com in order to request the credit reports from any one of the three credit reporting agencies, but I'm not sure the details on that.
The other issue is if someone is having a problem and that they cannot resolve with the credit reporting company, it could be helpful to file a complaint with the bureau's complaint portal to get some clarity and perhaps some assistance in addressing this type of problem. The bureau has a complaints portal that handles a variety of types of issues that consumers address with lenders, credit agencies, banks, and it can be very, very helpful in addressing certain issues.
Okay, we have another question, and it reads, when applying for rental assistance or utility assistance, do you need a computer to apply for those resources, or can you apply for those resources over the phone?
You should be able to apply for them over the phone in addition to by computer. I was just giving the link to the computer site where you could find out phone numbers and other links. So if you don't have access to a computer, then maybe somebody that you know has access to the computer that can get you the phone numbers, or you could also try calling 311 in your area to try to find out how to get it, or that elder care locator number as well is a good 800 number. In terms of all sorts of resources, they should be able to direct you to the phone number for rental assistance in your area as well. But you shouldn't be, yeah, you should still be able to get rental assistance even if you don't have access to a computer.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question, and it reads, now that we're all home with COVID and shopping online, amid so many choices, how do you pick a trustworthy website? And the part two to that question is, when shopping online, should you check out as a guest?
Those are very good questions. I mean, one big thing is make sure that you're checking out on a secure website, that it has the HTTPS with the S signifies secured, or the lock symbol at the top. If it doesn't have that, then don't give any personal financial information, because you can't be sure that your information is safe. Now, if it does have it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're free and that it's safe. That's just one of the first steps, one of the first things to look for. It's also good to look for reputable companies. You can check them with the BBB or with your local attorney general to see if there have been complaints against them. A lot of the local attorney generals have been looking into these online shopping complaints pretty vigorously. So that's a good place to check as well, to make sure the company that you're ordering from, especially if it's COVID related supplies, that was one of the biggest complaints filed with the FTC at the start of the pandemic, was people ordering COVID related supplies online and not getting them. So check out the company, make sure it's a secure website, and then also make sure that when you are doing your shopping, you're doing it from a secure connection, like from your home internet, not from a public Wi-Fi at, say, an airport or a coffee shop. I mean, those can be okay for checking certain things, but if it's not a secured Wi-Fi connection, then that's another way that hackers can get into your personal information.
We have another question here that reads, I believe I have been caught in a subscription trap. What can I do to get out of this trap?
Yes, that is a very good question. Sorry to hear that. That happens to a lot of people. Sometimes we call it a negative option, where you pay for something and then you continue to get it, but you didn't realize you were signing up for multiple months. You thought you were just signing up for 1 month, or you thought you were just getting a free trial. You can call the company and try to stop the subscription. You can file complaints with the Better Business Bureau, file complaints with the Federal Trade Commission, file complaints with your local attorney general. If you bought the subscription with your credit card, that's probably helpful, because credit cards have more protections, and you can call your credit card company and let them know and dispute the charges and ask them to put a hold on those charges. That will probably be the most effective thing, is if you bought it with a credit card and can go to the credit card company.
Okay. We have another question, and it reads, I've been scammed. I reported my scam to the authorities. What is the likelihood of getting my money back? Did I just waste my time?
Well, you did not waste your time. The important thing about reporting is that it does help law enforcement to stop scammers. So even if you don't get your money back, which I hope you do, by reporting, you are helping other people not be scammed, because with these reports, law enforcement can track trends and try to shut down the scammers and stop other people from being scammed. So it is really important to report, and good that you did report. In terms of whether you're likely to get your money back, there are a lot of factors involved. We're actually doing research on this right now to try to help people understand better how and when they can get recovery, but it's going to depend on, how you paid. If you paid by gift card or wire transfer, it's almost impossible to get that money back. It's going to depend on, how long ago it is, how, long you waited to, or how long it was before you discovered it was a scam even, as to whether you can get your money back. And it will also depend on a whole host of other factors, including the amount of money involved. If it's a larger dollar amount, then prosecutors may be interested in taking the case. If it's smaller, you probably have to find other similarly situated people involved in the same scam before there's going to be a criminal prosecution. So there's a lot of factors that affect recovery, but it is still really important to report, regardless of whether you recover or not. You can be a hero by helping stop scams from affecting other people.
Okay. Now we have another, and it reads, I don't own a shredder. My community doesn't offer community shredding. I've got a lot of personal papers that I want to get rid of. What do I do?
I would call that elder care locator or look up the elder care locator online to ask them if they can help you locate shredding near you. I know some people also burn documents in their fireplace. Of course, that has to be done safely so as not to start fires. So I don't want to be recommending that. But there are other things besides shredding that can get the documents so that they can't be taken by someone else. But probably the best situation is to call that elder care locator.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add there, I mean, there are organizations that do regular shredding events, community shredding events. So I would look for those. Someone may also want to you may also want to reach out to your area agency on aging. And until I find out if they're aware of resources of community shredding events or other shredding resources. I think there's a growing recognition of how important it is to be able to shred, to destroy documents, in a safe way. And there are organizations that do this periodically for free. So I think I would definitely try to identify some of those organizations. And reaching out to an area agency on aging is one way to do that.
Okay. And then we have, looks like 2 more questions here. It says 3 months ago, my friend ordered free samples of beauty products from an ad that popped up on her social media. The free trial required my friend to only pay for shipping fees. Now unexplained charges have appeared on her credit card statement. The charges appear again and again, month after month. What can she do?
I would definitely start by calling the credit card company and disputing it with them, and then also filing complaints with the FTC and the Attorney General. But the credit card company would be the place to go. If the credit card company doesn't give you proper or adequate resolution, then you can file a complaint with us at the CFPB at consumerfinance.gov. And the nice thing about filing a complaint with the CFPB is we do reach out to the company to try to get a resolution of your complaint, and usually hear back within about 15 days from the company. So first, do try on your own to get resolution, but if you're not satisfied or can't get resolution, then you can file with consumerfinance.gov/complaint.
And then we have another question, and it reads, when I pay my telephone bill, I notice a day later, I get messages that encourage me to click on a link. I've not clicked on the link, but I keep getting these messages. Should I report this to my phone carrier?
Well, first of all, I think it's really good that this person is suspicious. And I mean, that's a really good sign. And I would say, yes, absolutely, contact the provider and to verify that this message has come from the provider. Contact the provider at the number on your bill and make that inquiry. But this is a very this is a very, yes, that is what I would suggest. I think that would be one way to address it. Lisa, you may want to add something to that.
I think that's good advice. That's what I would suggest as well.
Okay. Okay. We don't have any more questions in the chat, but it looks like we have about 5 minutes or so. So if others have questions, please enter those in the chat. We'd love to hear from you.
While
And-
we're waiting, I also want just to acknowledge and thank our colleague, Chanel Blunt, who's been putting up the links in the chat. Chanel is part of our outreach team. She's just a great contributor. And thank you, Chanel. We don't see you on the screen, but we know you're there and we appreciate all of your support today.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Deborah. Happy to help.
Okay, looks like we have one question here. It says a salesperson came to my door to inspect my HVAC system. Having let that person inside, they informed me that the unit needed to be replaced immediately to avoid damaging my home. They told me a repair crew was outside and that they could do the work right away if I could sign the release form now. I didn't. Is that the right thing to do?
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many red flags in this situation. Unsolicited call, unsolicited visit to you, diagnosing the problem immediately and adding pressure for you to act quickly. That's always, a red flag. So I think the person, that person made a good decision. I'll tell you, I was wondering if somebody knew about my recent situation, who wrote that, because we recently had a problem with our HVAC system, and it's very similar circumstances. There was a referral by someone we actually knew to another person we didn't know. That person called us. Came out, looked, immediately concluded we needed a new unit, and then wanted us to pay him immediately by Venmo. And, there are lots of red flags there. Of course, we didn't. We kind of stepped back, slowed down, went back and did the research and concluded later, one, we didn't need a new HVAC unit. And two, the amount that he was proposing to charge was about 3 times what it should have cost. And 3, the payment mechanism that he was recommending was one that had essentially no accountability tied to it, so that we would not have been able to recover our money if we had indeed made that decision. So lots of red flags in that scenario. They resonated with me because of a recent personal experience. And I think those are the kinds of things that consumers should be looking out for.
Okay. It looks like we have time for one more question, and it reads, can you please explain what spoofing means, or what is it?
Sure. Spoofing is a term that's basically used for faking someone's phone number on caller ID. So I could be a scammer in another country calling you, and I could make it look like I'm calling from the Social Security Administration, or I can make it look like I'm calling from the IRS, or I can even make it look like I'm calling from an area code in your neighborhood. So spoofing is just a scammer who's able to, through technology, make the caller ID look like they're calling from someplace that they're not. So it makes their scam appear more legitimate than it is. So that's why we said earlier, it's really important that you can't trust caller ID necessarily. If anyone calls you out of the blue asking for payment or personal information, don't give it out, because you don't know who it is calling you.
Well, yeah. It looks like we've reached 2:15. And again, we'd like to thank you both. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Chanel. This has been wonderful, thoughtful, and thought-provoking. I've got some work to do to secure my personal effects. And so I thank you for giving me the tools to do so. We think that we know this is an ongoing conversation, so we hope you will consider joining us again for part 2. Thank you very much. And I'm going to pivot to Ms. Jones and ask her if she'd like to weigh in before we sign off.
No, I just want to also echo what you've said, Angie, and I appreciate you all coming on. And I know I've got work to do too, in terms of securing myself. Everything somebody was mentioning, I was like, oh my goodness. So it definitely affects everybody. No one is safe. And
Yes.
so all the information you have is very good. And I think this is something that certainly is ongoing, that we share with as many people as possible.
Yes.
So thank you so much. And Angie, thank you. Angela
you.
Ellsford, thank you. Appreciate all that you all have done.
Well, it's our pleasure to be here. This is an important dialogue and we look forward to continuing it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.